Hi, I'm Adele Sinclair. In this session, we're going to talk about workplace bullying and how to deal with it. My guest today is a psychologist. She's an expert on bullying of many decades standing. She's the best-selling author of 6 books on bullying, and she's a media commentator. She's a convener of a special interest group within the International Association of Workplace Bullying and Harassment. She's on the Advisory Council of the National Centre Against Bullying, and in 2014 received the Order of Australia Medal for her work on school and workplace initiatives against bullying. I first came across my guest today back in 2007 when I purchased her book. And so I'm really pleased that Evelyn has accepted my invitation to speak with me today. And I'm delighted to be able to bring to you Evelyn Field. Evelyn Field, welcome to Wellness at Work.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
You've been working on bullying for many years now. How do you define it? How do you define bullying?
Well, I think it's about a description rather than a definition. And to me, it's about an abuse of power that at the end of the day injures one person or a number, and it could be the target, the bully, and the bystanders.
So how do we define, or how do we notice when something is bullying behaviour versus, for example, if someone doesn't like their performance review, or if someone's just speaking harshly to someone? Where are the boundaries?
I think that the first thing is that I think since we were children in kindergarten, we have a fairness meter. Mm-hmm. We know if mummy and daddy are doing something that is fair or not fair in disciplining us, or the same thing at school. And I think that adults don't lose that at work, and I think they know, hey, this is fair or not fair. And so if you have a tough boss who's tough with everybody, you say, oh, well, that's the way he is. But if he's tough with one person and not with others, then that's not fair. If it's inappropriate, if it's excessive, if the manner in which the manager let's say, gives feedback to an employee is not appropriate, it's not fair. So I think people can assess, is it fair or not fair? Now, bullying is not a conflict. A conflict is about a difference of opinion between two people with equal power. And there are a lot of academics and researchers who still don't get it right. Bullying is not a conflict. Bullying is when one person knows consciously or unconsciously that they're taking something away from another person. They're abusing them, they're making fun of them, they're ostracizing them, whatever it might be. They understand the social game.
Can people be, in your opinion, can people be bullying or have bullying behaviours unconsciously? I've certainly seen it in my management career, people that really did have bullying behaviours and they had no idea. What's your experience?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think there are some excellent books, Robert O'Hare and John Clark, who talk about the psychopaths in the workplace. But the numbers are very, very small. So you might look at 3 to 4% of the workplace having psychopathic tendencies or sociopathic tendencies. Most bullies are ordinary people like you or me or your friends or my friends or our families. And we think it's not that bad. We think we can get away with it. We don't realise what we're doing is harmful and so on. So in other words, most bullies don't really mean to do what they're doing. If they're confronted, it is devastating. Years later, we know that kids who are bullies at school feel a lot of shame and they're apologising on Facebook and reunions. And we know if someone is accused of being a bully in the workplace, it can be devastating. Basically, we've got to understand what bullying behaviours are and why they're bad and what we can do about them. But it's how many years ago that smoking was seen as okay, and smoking and blowing the smoke in your face was seen as okay.
Yeah.
Whereas now we realise, hey, it's not okay. So I think you're right. Most bullies don't realise the impact of what they're doing.
And so you mentioned that it can be devastating. What do you see as the impacts of bullying in your practice?
Well, I'm a psychologist, and I trained originally with children. So I look at it very, very simply. I look at physical symptoms, psychological symptoms, social symptoms, cognitive changes or symptoms, and personality change. So you get the brain imploding. You get people becoming very, very ill. such as fibromyalgia or brain hemorrhages, putting on weight or losing weight, blood pressure problems, gastro problems. There's a very common pattern. Cognitive problems, obviously, due to stress, PTSD, depression, social lives suffer. And then we've got the big one, you know, all the depression disorders, the anxiety disorders, trauma, PTSD, chronic trauma, relational trauma. Those are really the main things. And of course, we've got the personality change. So if you've been badly bullied at work and you can't go back to work, or certainly back to that workplace, and you haven't been back at work for 2 years, I would guess that there's been a personality change. You're not the same that you were. You probably never will be. And most of the people you've dealt with don't really understand what it's all about anyway.
Yeah.
And further invalidating. And if you get work cover insurance, then that invalidates further because you're further bullied and abused and harassed. Nice picture, isn't it?
Indeed. And so many of the symptoms and the impacts that you just listed, each time you were mentioning, it was like, yep, stress hormones, and all of the effects that come from, you know, chronic stress, you know, whether it's the immune system, whether, you know, it then starts leading to the depression and anxiety and so forth. I know for myself that you know, I had an experience in my management career where I was actually being bullied at the same time by another member in the senior management team and one of my staff. And at the time, it was just like, oh, you know, I just deal with it. I was kind of in denial that it was bullying until afterwards. But going into my next role, I guess it also affected me in that role, but predominantly in the next role, it really affected my confidence. You know, you were always sort of second guessing yourself. You were looking for the next thing to jump out of the bushes. And yeah, it can really make you much more sensitive to a whole lot of different.
One thing I do need to say is that we see it very common with the medical profession, they confuse stress with trauma. And biochemically, the two are very, very different. Professor Rachel Yehuda, an American, has done a lot of work on that. So the biochemistry between having a lot of stress, anxiety, and having a trauma, particularly in this case a relational trauma, which is ongoing chronic, is very, very different. One is a reaction to what's going on or something genetic. The other is it's suddenly happened or you're suddenly aware and your life's been threatened, and that changes people.
Yeah. Interesting.
So it has to look for the trauma.
Okay. And physiologically, in terms of the hormones and so forth, is that the same, or are they sort of subtly different? Is it
different? It's different. It's like saying I've got a broken arm or a bruised arm. Totally
interesting.
And what we have to do is say, well, what parts of the brain are being injured? And brain scans are still in a very early stage, but it won't take long, not more than 5 to 10 years, before we'll be able to look at a bullied brain and a non-bullied brain, or an injured brain and a non-injured brain, a brain with chronic PTSD or a relational trauma, or someone who's just been in a single incident like a hold-up or a car accident that was traumatic. There are differences in the brain and differences in treatment and one's whole life, yes.
Fascinating.
So trauma changes the brain, and trauma can exist from childhood onwards and change a young person's brain forever. And it can be transmitted genetically.
So in terms of the workplace, you know, with regard to workplace bullying, what are some guiding principles that people can follow to approach bullying situations in positive and effective ways?
If you're being bullied, you need to take a record. You need to speak to your GP. You need to go and consult a psychologist to work out how to deal with the bully so that you can block them early on. You need to find out what your union can do to help, what your legal rights are. You might talk to HR, occupational health and safety. But even though you've got a policy, it doesn't always mean that they will implement it. But I would like to suggest this, that if your employer is not using collaborative restorative practices to resolve differences between employees, then they're probably taking the adversarial path. What does that mean? they're bullying the bullied.
And we do see that situation in many workplaces. You know, I'm pleased to see that there are some managers and some organisations that are trying to do the right thing, but there is still so many managers and organisations that do take that adversarial approach, sadly.
Well, I don't think they understand that, you know, you don't build a racehorse for it to achieve. You know, if you're going to tap it, you tap it lightly. And if you treat your staff well, they will try and do the best. And if you create a staff where people are working together as a team, then you're going to get a better culture. If there are differences, you're going to sit down like you would in your family and talk about them and resolve them.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
It's not like at work, you don't choose who you work with. You choose whoever is given to you, and you have to learn how to get on with people.
Yeah.
That's part of living in a village or a tribe.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah.
But I think the employer has to set the standards, the policies that have to be negotiated with staff, the preventative practices, the intervention practices, the follow-up, the auditing. And unfortunately, many organisations don't train their managers, they don't audit them, they don't make them accountable. They are paid to manage, but they're not made accountable for their management skills. And at the end of the day, your management experts will say bullying is about poor management.
Yeah, the managers do definitely set the tone in an organisation, and you're right in terms of, you know, relationships in the workplace and how they can really make such a difference. So on that, in terms of a bullying situation, if someone's not necessarily being bullied themselves, but if they see it happening, or if they're a manager who does want to do the right thing and has had a bullying situation reported to them, maybe not necessarily even from their team, but someone's come to them saying, this is what I've seen. What's your recommendation for those sort of bystander people who want to be helpful?
Well, you see, this depends again on what your organisation's doing. In fact, I'm just developing a program for organisations. What I believe is that you've got to set up your company in such a way that they know what the rules are, the policies, they've taken part in them, they know what the procedures are, and if something is going wrong, they know exactly what to do. So that if they see someone being bullied, they can put in a confidential slip, they can type it on their email, their phone or computer to somebody, to a confidential hitline, or they might bring it up at the meeting, the staff meeting, which should be regularly, and say, I was upset when you talked so rudely to Mary in front of her clients. You know, just very simply, not you shouldn't do this, but, you know, I felt upset when. In other words, as part of a management structure, you have to create, rules, regulations, behaviours, ways of speaking to one another that say it's okay for someone to report when this is happening. On the other hand, if nobody cares and nobody is interested, then you have to say, is it safe for me to intervene as a manager, as a bystander? And Philip Zimbardo, who's an expert in all of this, says, you know, don't be a hero on your own because you'll get knocked down. That it's only if a few of you go to another manager and say, look, we're really upset by what's going on. It's affecting everyone's productivity when he screams at her, when he locks her in the room next to him and he brushes his hand on her knee all the time. You know, these are upsetting to us. We just don't know what to do. So I think it's about making it safe for people to report. At the end of the day, bullying is about humiliation and ostracism. In other words, employees need to feel safe and validated and respected and part of the team. That's all we want to do. That's our tribal self, our social survival self.
Yeah.
And what the bully does and their managers do is say, you're not good enough. You're out of the tribe, of the team. So they're really threatening their survival needs. So ideally, organisations should start working on their preventative practices so that if somebody sees something, they know what to do and they know there is a backup.
So on that, you mentioned the policies and procedures and sort of setting the standard and setting the culture. You mentioned just making it okay for people to talk about it and having a much more transparent culture, and using team meetings and so forth to be able to just talk in general and positive terms if it's safe to do so. You said if it's not safe to do so, to have some trusted supporters who are able to work together or band together, not to be a hero. And so really what I'm taking from that is that it's interlinked with good organisational culture. It's interlinked with good management, with good communication, with good teamwork skills. And the more we're able to cultivate that, the more that's going to lessen the likelihood and the impact of bullying, because there is that positive underpinning in the workplace and the team culture, and also that social support. How does that sound to you?
Yeah, that sounds good. And basically the solutions to workplace bullying are very, very simple. And they're all based around good management and listening to your staff and giving feedback to your staff. I saw a man yesterday who'd put 41 years into a company. That's all his life. Now they've bullied him out. And what I'm hearing is that, they liked his work, but they've been trying to get rid of him for a while. Now, has he been doing something? Do they not like his personality, his communication skills? Or is he just too expensive, because he's in his 60s and they want to get rid of him early? I don't know. But I think organisations need to have the guts to have the conversations with their employees. We don't like the way you do this, or are you aware that you're doing this? Yes. And it's that courageous conversation. But I think at the end of the day, it's about auditing your managers. They're paid to manage, and that's what they should be doing. And that's why we have more bullying in the health, welfare and education and government areas than in private business. Because in private business, employees are more aware of the need for their managers to be better trained. Whereas in your hospitals, your schools, your welfare organisations and government, it's who you know, what you know. The fact that you're a good doctor, social worker, psychologist, teacher gets you into the management job, even though you don't have the management training, you're not made accountable, etc. That's my belief anyway. Yes.
Yeah, certainly that's very common in my experience, that people do get often promoted for their technical skills or their understanding of the organisational climate or the context sort of thing. It's not necessarily for their management skills. I think that's a generic challenge for Australian workplaces. I agree with you on that. Do you have any final points? If you had to summarise what the individual can do to make a difference just in their own way, if they're not a manager, to make a positive impact in their team or their work environment, what could they do? Just one thing.
I think it's clear communication based on the feedback. In other words, if I say I am upset about whatever, and I go to my manager and I look at her reaction, are they interested? Do they care or not? Because if I'm working hard, and many people who bully do work hard, if I'm working hard for an employer who really doesn't give a stuff about me, well, what does it say about me? And I'm sure there are plenty of marriages like this and plenty of other friendships like this where you're giving, but the other person is taking, not prepared to listen to your perspective. In other words, read the feedback. Does your manager want to hear about this? Does your manager want to do something about it? Even if they say, look, we understand that Jack is always like that. He always screams wherever we go. We're looking into doing what we can. Meanwhile, let's do blah, blah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So communicate, test the waters, test the feedback, as you said, and then act accordingly after that.
And, of course, your best ally for workplace bullying is your phone. Record, video, and show back. And if they don't care, up it onto YouTube.
Oh, that's a controversial one. Okay, we'll leave that one there. Okay, so for people who wanted to continue to learn from you, Evelyn, how can they do that? How can they find you?
You can look at my website, www.bullying.com.au. There are 2 books published by Australian Academic Press, Bully Blocking at Work and Strategies for Surviving Bullying at Work. Just email me if you really need some information, efield@bullying.com.au. There is a lot of information about bullying. Unfortunately, our medical profession is still very behind, and we can't expect managers to know more than the doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists. But hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years, the word might get through that this is a serious workplace injury, and if we can prevent it, which is possible, then that's going to be much better.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us today, Evelyn. Really appreciate you sharing all of those perspectives and insights and strategies with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.